the beginning of my journey. My name is Amelia, and I've always been fascinated by languages. Growing up in a small town, I often dreamt of traveling the world, experiencing different cultures, and connecting with people from diverse backgrounds. English to me was the key to that world, a language that opened doors to endless opportunities. But there was one problem. I struggled with it. It all started when I moved to the United States for my studies. The excitement of a new beginning was overshadowed by the overwhelming challenge of adapting to a foreign environment. I had studied English in school, but the classroom lessons felt distant from the fast-paced conversations I encountered in real life. The slang, the accents, the speed. It all felt like a whirlwind that I couldn't keep up with. My first day in New York City was both exhilarating and terrifying. The city buzzed with life, but I felt lost in translation. Simple tasks like ordering food or asking for directions became daunting. I remember standing at a coffee shop, rehearsing my order in my head, only to stammer when it was my turn. The barista's puzzled look only added to my embarrassment. I managed to get my coffee, but the experience left me feeling small and insecure. Meeting my mentor, a few weeks into my stay, I enrolled in an English language course at a local community center. The class was filled with people from all over the world, each with their own story, each struggling with their own version of English. Our teacher, Mrs. Thompson, was a warm and encouraging woman who had a way of making everyone feel at ease. She had a unique approach to teaching, one that focused on using English in real-life situations rather than just memorizing grammar rules. One day after class, I stayed back to talk to her. I confessed how inadequate I felt, how I often avoided conversations because I was afraid of making mistakes. Mrs. Thompson smiled and shared something that stuck with me. She said, "Amelia, language is not about perfection. It's about connection. Every mistake you make is a step forward, a sign that you're trying. Embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and don't let them hold you back." Her words were a turning point for me. I realized that learning a language wasn't a race, it was a journey, one that required patience, persistence, and a willingness to be vulnerable. Struggles and small victories. As the weeks went by, I started to apply Mrs. Thompson's advice. I forced myself to engage in conversations, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. I'd strike up small talks with my classmates, chat with the cashier at the grocery store, and even join group discussions at the center. Each conversation was a battle, but with each battle, I grew a little stronger. I also started keeping a journal, writing down new words and phrases I encountered throughout the day. It became my personal dictionary, filled with scribbles, notes, and translations. But more than that, it became a record of my progress. On days when I felt discouraged, I'd flip through the pages and remind myself of how far I'd come. One of the most challenging moments was giving a presentation in front of the class. Public speaking in my native language was nerve-wracking enough, but doing it in English felt impossible. I spent hours preparing, practicing in front of the mirror, trying to perfect every word. The day of the presentation, my hands trembled and my voice quivered, but I made it through. The applause from my classmates wasn't just for the presentation. It was for the courage it took to stand up there and speak. Finding confidence with time, I began to notice changes in myself. I was no longer terrified of speaking English. There was still a long way to go, but I was starting to feel more comfortable, more confident. I even started to enjoy the process of learning, finding joy in discovering new words, mastering tricky pronunciations, and understanding cultural nuances. One day, while on the subway, I overheard a conversation between two Americans discussing their weekend plans. To my surprise, I could follow along, catching every word and even understanding the jokes. It was a small moment, but it filled me with a sense of accomplishment. I realized that I was no longer just surviving in this new environment. I was thriving, the power of perseverance. My journey was far from over, but I had come to appreciate the beauty in the struggle. Learning English wasn't just about acquiring a new language. It was about growth, resilience, and self-discovery. It taught me that it's okay to be imperfect, that making mistakes is a natural part of learning, and that the only way to improve is to keep pushing forward, no matter how tough it gets. Mrs. Thompson continued to be a guiding light, offering support and encouragement whenever I needed it. She once told me, "Amelia, you're not just learning English, you're building bridges. Every word you learn, every sentence you speak, is a connection to someone else's world." Those words stayed with me, reminding me that language is more than just a tool. It's a way to connect, to understand, and to be understood. My English might still have flaws, but it no longer feels like a barrier. Instead, it feels like a door, one that I'm finally learning to open. A new beginning today. I run a YouTube channel called Learn English with Amelia. It's a place where I share my experiences, offer tips, and connect with others who are on their own language learning journey. I want to help people who, like me, once felt lost and overwhelmed. I want them to know that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to take things one step at a time. Looking back, I'm grateful for the challenges I faced. They made me stronger, more resilient, and more compassionate. They taught me that the road to success is paved with small victories, and that every step, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goal. Learning English was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the most rewarding. And as I continue to grow and learn, I hope to inspire others to keep going, to keep pushing forward, and to never give up on their dreams. Chapter 1. The Unfolding of Time. Maggie Parker was a woman who believed in the small things, simple gestures that carried the weight of love, like the way her mother used to leave the porch light on, even when she knew Maggie would be home late. It wasn't about the light. It was about the warmth it symbolized, a beacon guiding her back to safety, to comfort. Maggie grew up in a small town in Nebraska, where the fields stretched out endlessly under the big sky and everyone knew everyone else's business. But that wasn't always a bad thing. It meant that when her father died unexpectedly when she was just 12, the entire community rallied around her family. Neighbors brought casseroles and offered to mow the lawn. Her mother, once vibrant and full of life, seemed to shrink within herself after the loss, leaving Maggie to shoulder responsibilities that were far too heavy for someone her age. Her father had been her hero, a quiet man, strong and steady, with a gentle smile that never failed to make her feel safe. He taught her to ride a bike, read her stories at night, and always had time to listen to her childish worries. Losing him was like losing a part of herself. For years, Maggie carried the weight of her grief silently. She became the strong one, the dependable one, the one everyone else could lean on. Her mother retreated into her room, leaving Maggie to care for her younger brother, Tommy. Tommy was only 6 when their father died, and he clung to Maggie as if she were the only thing keeping him from drowning in a sea of sorrow. The years passed, and Maggie grew up too fast. She went to school, worked part-time jobs, and made sure Tommy did his homework and had lunch packed every day. She sacrificed her teenage years, her dreams, for the sake of her family. But she never complained. She knew her father would have wanted her to be strong. Chapter 2: The Weight of Sacrifice. By the time Maggie graduated high school, she had given up on the idea of going away to college. Instead, she enrolled in a local community college so she could stay close to home and continue to care for Tommy and her mother. Her mother had improved somewhat, but she was still a shadow of the woman she had once been. Tommy, on the other hand, thrived under Maggie's care. He excelled in school, made friends easily, and developed a passion for baseball. Maggie never missed a game, cheering him on from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride every time he hit the ball. But as Tommy grew older, he began to notice the toll that taking care of him had taken on Maggie. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she brushed off offers from friends to go out and have fun. She was always there for him, always putting him first, and he began to feel guilty for it. One day, when Tommy was 15, he found Maggie sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, tears streaming down her face. He had never seen her cry before, and it shook him to his core. "Maggie, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice trembling. She looked up at him, her eyes red and puffy, and forced a smile. "Nothing, Tommy. I'm just tired." But Tommy knew better. He sat down beside her and took her hand. "You've done so much for me, Maggie. You've given up everything to take care of us. It's not fair." Maggie shook her head. "Tommy, you're my brother. I love you. I would do anything for you." "But you shouldn't have to," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "You deserve to live your own life, to follow your dreams." Maggie squeezed his hand. "You're my dream, Tommy. Seeing you happy, seeing you succeed. That's all I've ever wanted." Tommy's heart ached as he realized how much Maggie had sacrificed for him. He made a silent vow then and there that he would repay her for everything she had done, that he would make her proud. Chapter 3. The road less traveled years went by, and Tommy did everything he could to live up to Maggie's expectations. He worked hard in school, earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, and graduated at the top of his class. He got a good job in a big city and started sending money home to help Maggie with the bills. But even as Tommy's life flourished, Maggie's remained the same. She still lived in the same small town, in the same old house. She worked at a local grocery store, never having pursued the career she once dreamed of. Her life had become a routine, a series of obligations and responsibilities that she had accepted without complaint. Then, one day, everything changed. Tommy came home for a visit, excited to share some news with Maggie. He had been offered a job in New York City, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that would set him on the path to success. But there was a catch. The job required him to move immediately. When he told Maggie, he saw the pride in her eyes, but also a flicker of something else. Fear. "I'm so proud of you, Tommy," Maggie said, her voice steady. "But I'm going to miss you so much." Tommy felt a pang of guilt. He knew that Maggie had been his rock, his support system for so long. Leaving her behind felt like a betrayal. "Maggie, why don't you come with me?" he suggested, hoping she would say yes. "We could start fresh in New York. You could finally do something for yourself." Maggie shook her head. "This is my home, Tommy. I can't just leave." But Tommy could see the longing in her eyes, the desire for something more. He knew that she had given up so much for him, and now it was his turn to give something back. Chapter 4. The unseen thread. Tommy moved to New York, but he didn't forget about Maggie. He called her every day, sent her pictures of his new life, and tried to convince her to visit. But Maggie always had an excuse. She was too busy. She couldn't afford it. She was needed at home. Then, one day, Tommy received a call from Maggie's neighbor. Maggie had collapsed at work and was in the hospital. Tommy's heart raced as he booked the first flight back to Nebraska. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Maggie lying in a hospital bed, looking pale and fragile. She smiled when she saw him, but it was a weak, tired smile. "Tommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tommy rushed to her side, taking her hand in his. "Maggie, what happened?" She shook her head. "I'm fine, Tommy. Just a little worn out." But Tommy could see the truth in her eyes. Maggie had spent so many years taking care of everyone else that she had forgotten to take care of herself. "Maggie, you can't keep doing this," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "You've given up everything for us. It's time for you to take care of yourself." Maggie looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Tommy, I don't know how." Tommy's heart ached as he realized how much Maggie had sacrificed, how she had lost herself in the process of caring for others. He knew that he had to do something, that he couldn't let her continue down this path. "Maggie, you don't have to do this alone," Tommy said, his voice firm. "Let me help you. Let me take care of you for a change." Maggie looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Tommy, I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Tommy said, his voice soft. "You're my sister, and I love you. Let me help you find yourself again." Chapter 5. A New Thread. After Maggie was released from the hospital, Tommy convinced her to move to New York with him. It wasn't easy. Maggie was reluctant to leave the only life she had ever known. But Tommy was persistent. He wanted her to see that there was more to life than the sacrifices she had made, that she deserved happiness too. In New York, Maggie struggled at first. The city was overwhelming, and she felt out of place. The constant noise, the crowds, and the fast pace were all so different from the quiet life she had led back in Nebraska. But Tommy was there to support her every step of the way. He helped her find a job at a small bookstore, where she could immerse herself in the world of literature that she had always loved. As the months went by, Maggie began to find herself again. She made friends, explored the city, and even started writing in her spare time, a passion she had long forgotten. She found joy in the simple things, like taking a walk in Central Park or having coffee with Tommy on Sunday mornings. But the biggest change was within herself. Maggie realized that it was okay to let go of the past, to allow herself to be happy. She no longer felt guilty for pursuing her own dreams, for living her own life. One day, as she was sitting in the park, watching the leaves fall from the trees, Maggie realized something. Her father had once told her that life was like a tapestry woven together with threads of love, sacrifice, and hope. Each thread was important, but none more so than the threads of happiness and self-fulfillment. For the first time in her life, Maggie understood that she had the right to weave her own threads into the tapestry. She smiled as she thought about the journey she had taken, how she had spent years caring for her family, sacrificing her own dreams. But now, she was ready to embrace a new chapter, one where her own desires and happiness were at the forefront. Maggie knew that this didn't mean forgetting her past, or the love she had for her family. It meant honoring those experiences, while also allowing herself to grow, to dream, and to live fully. In the following weeks, Maggie's writing flourished. She wrote about her life, her struggles, and the lessons she had learned. Her stories were filled with emotion, with the wisdom she had gained through years of sacrifice and self-discovery. She started attending a local writers' group, where she shared her work and received encouragement from others who recognized her talent. Tommy noticed the change in his sister. She was lighter, more at ease. The weight that had burdened her for so long seemed to have lifted. One evening, as they sat together in their apartment, he asked her, "Maggie, do you ever think about going back to Nebraska?" Maggie looked at him and smiled. "I do," she said softly, "but not to stay. That chapter of my life is over. I'll always carry it with me. But this," she gestured to the city beyond the window, the life she was building. "This is where I'm meant to be now." Tommy nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "I've always wanted you to find your own path, and I'm proud of you for taking that step." Maggie reached over and squeezed his hand. "I'm grateful for you, Tommy. You helped me see that it's okay to put myself first sometimes. I think Dad would be proud too." As she continued to weave the threads of her new life, Maggie found that the tapestry she was creating was more beautiful and complex than she had ever imagined. It was a tapestry woven with love, with sacrifice, with the memories of the past, and the hope for the future. And at the center of it all was a new thread, a thread of happiness, self-discovery, and the realization that she had the power to shape her own destiny. Maggie had found her place in the world, not as the caretaker she had always been, but as a woman who knew her worth and who was ready to embrace all the possibilities that life had to offer. The threads of her past were still there, woven into the fabric of who she was, but now they were joined by a new thread, one that was uniquely hers. Chapter 6. Embracing the colors of life. Maggie sat in the park, her father's words echoing in her mind. The metaphor of life as a tapestry resonated deeply with her. She had spent so much of her life weaving the threads of love and sacrifice for others. But now, in this new chapter, she realized she needed to start weaving her own thread, a thread that would add vibrancy and richness to the tapestry of her life. Tommy noticed the change in Maggie. She smiled more, laughed easily, and her eyes sparkled with a newfound sense of purpose. She had rediscovered her passion for writing, spending hours at her small desk in the cozy apartment they shared, lost in the world of words and stories. It was as if the Maggie who had once been buried under the weight of responsibility was slowly coming back to life. One evening after dinner, Tommy handed Maggie an envelope. "What's this?" she asked, looking at him curiously. "Open it," Tommy replied with a grin. Maggie tore open the envelope and pulled out a piece of paper. As she read the words, her eyes widened in surprise. It was an invitation to a writer's workshop hosted by one of the most respected literary agencies in New York. "Tommy, how?" she started, but her voice trailed off, overwhelmed with emotion. "I know how much writing means to you," Tommy said, his voice soft. "You've always been so talented, Maggie. I thought this would be a great opportunity for you to share your stories with the world." Maggie felt tears welling up in her eyes. For so long, she had put her dreams on hold, convinced that they were unattainable. But Tommy's belief in her, his unwavering support, gave her the courage to take that leap of faith. The workshop was a turning point for Maggie. Surrounded by like-minded individuals, she felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't felt in years. The other writers were passionate, driven, and their enthusiasm was contagious. Maggie shared her work hesitantly at first, but the positive feedback she received boosted her confidence. As the weeks went by, Maggie's stories began to take shape. She wrote about the small town she had grown up in, the struggles and triumphs of ordinary people, and the quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest times. Her writing was deeply personal, infused with the raw emotions she had kept bottled up for so long. One day, the workshop's instructor, a seasoned author with years of experience, pulled her aside. "Maggie, your writing has a unique voice, a depth that's hard to find. Have you ever considered publishing your stories?" The idea of publishing had crossed Maggie's mind, but she had always dismissed it as a distant dream. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but I'm not sure if I'm ready." "You are ready," the instructor said firmly. "Your stories deserve to be heard. I can help you with the process, introduce you to some editors. Think about it, Maggie. This could be the start of something amazing." Maggie felt a surge of excitement mixed with fear. The thought of sharing her stories with the world was both exhilarating and terrifying. But deep down, she knew this was what she had been working towards all her life. Chapter 7. The Tapestry of Dreams. As Maggie embarked on the journey to publish her first book, she found herself reflecting on the path that had led her here. The years of sacrifice, the moments of joy and sorrow, the love that had sustained her. They were all woven into the fabric of her life, creating a tapestry rich with meaning and beauty. The process of publishing was challenging. There were countless revisions, meetings with editors, and moments of self-doubt. But every time Maggie felt overwhelmed, she remembered the words of her father, the wisdom that had guided her through so many difficult times. Life's tapestry was woven with many threads, and each thread, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, played a crucial role in creating the whole. Maggie's book was finally published, a collection of short stories that captured the essence of her life experiences. She titled it The Unseen Thread, a tribute to her father and the lessons he had taught her. The book received glowing reviews, with critics praising its emotional depth and authenticity. But what mattered most to Maggie was the response from readers. People who had experienced similar struggles, who found solace and inspiration in her words. One day, Maggie received a letter from a reader who had been going through a difficult time. The woman wrote about how Maggie's stories had given her hope, reminding her that even in the darkest moments, there was always a thread of light to hold on to. As Maggie read the letter, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her stories had touched someone's life, just as her father's words had touched hers. It was a reminder that the threads we weave, the connections we make, have the power to change lives in ways we may never fully understand. Chapter 8. A Legacy of Love. Years passed, and Maggie's life continued to evolve. She wrote more books, each one a reflection of her journey, and her audience grew. But she never forgot where she came from, the small town that had shaped her, and the sacrifices that had brought her to this point. Tommy too thrived in his career, but he never lost sight of the bond he shared with Maggie. They remained close, supporting each other through life's ups and downs. Tommy eventually got married and started a family of his own, and Maggie became an adored aunt to his children. Maggie's mother, who had been her first inspiration, also experienced a transformation. With Maggie's success and Tommy's love, she found the strength to emerge from the shadows of her grief. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping others who had lost loved ones. And in doing so, she rediscovered a sense of purpose. The years were kind to Maggie, but she knew that life was not just about the big moments. It was about the small, everyday actions, the unseen threads that connected us to one another, that created a legacy of love. As she grew older, Maggie often reflected on the journey she had taken. She thought about her father, the quiet strength that had been her guiding light, and the way his wisdom had shaped her life. She thought about Tommy, the brother she had cared for, who had grown into a man she was incredibly proud of. And she thought about the stories she had written, the way they had touched the lives of others, weaving their own threads into the tapestry of life. One evening, as the sun set over the New York skyline, Maggie sat by the window of her apartment, a cup of tea in hand. She looked out at the city that had become her home, the place where she had found herself again. A gentle breeze rustled the curtains, and she closed her eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace. Maggie knew that life was a tapestry, a beautiful, intricate design created by the threads of love, sacrifice, hope, and dreams. And though the threads were sometimes invisible, they were always there, holding everything together. She smiled to herself, knowing that her story was just one of many, a single thread in the vast tapestry of life. But it was a thread that had been woven with love, with care, and with a deep understanding of what truly mattered. And in the end, that was enough. I hope you all have enjoyed reading the book with me. I will keep bringing more videos like this, so that you all can also learn to speak good English with me. And yes, I hope you like the story too. Thank you very much for reading with us.